Tuesday,
happy days.
Wednesday, Thursday,
happy days.
Friday, whatever,
happy days.
What a day.
I love you.
I love you too.
Best known as the mom from Happy Days, and she is a delightful 89-year young Marion Ross to my studio. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Dr. Marissa, this is such a treat for me. Oh. My goodness, you're a wonderment.
Which is exactly the kind of guest that I like. Those who have gone through life, good and bad, and then taken those experiences to alchemize them into the person they are now and doing good on the planet. I'd like you to welcome Corey Feldman.
If you're grateful for it and you say right away, thank you, God. Oh, my God, it's so beautiful. I'm so blessed. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Then guess what? More good things will come to you.
Does this sound familiar at all? She's back again to mark my Cancer Awareness and Prevention Month show. Please welcome Fran Drescher. Hi, Fran.
And supporting cancer schmance. I really appreciate it.
So what would you say are some of the biggest myths, Fran, that people have about cancer?
Well, I would say that they think that there's a cure for it.
Okay.
Instead of a cause for it.
This is the first call-in show when I get to be Dr. Marissa, the kinder, gentler Dr. Laura. And people call in to get their life tires balanced and their critical thinking or their BS, their belief systems, smog checked. And today I am delighted to have Malie calling in from Birmingham, Alabama.
We could go 90 days and end up having terrible sex. And then you say, well, the relationship's not all about sex. Well, if I'm not getting great sex from you, then I'm going to get it from somebody else. Right?
That moose just got put on the table. And I see Josh and Jim.
I have to agree
You're
with Clyde.
both nodding. Ramon's sort of half nodding because his wife's listening. But
I understood what was going to happen if Muhammad Ali's youngest daughter, made public that I was going to become a boxer. So I wanted to make sure this was the path that I wanted to go down.
You are absolutely fabulous, beautiful inside and out. And I'm giving you Dr. Marissa's Beneficial Presence on the Planet Award today.
Thank you.
Just sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a fateful trip that started from this tropic point.
When I go, I'm gone.
Are you lonely?
No.
Nah, I knew that was going to be
But
the
I
answer.
surround myself with people. I mean, I'm always the one cooking for things. Or I'm always the one that decorates first and come to my house. All the orphans that have no place.
I'm going to have no place to go, so I can come over.
Come on over.
And life is so amazing if we can see it.
Jump off that exhausting hamster wheel and into balanced living with Dr. Marissa.
Promise you joy in the mystery.
Dr. Marissa, also known as the Asian Oprah. Her mission, to be a beneficial presence on the planet. Her purpose, to be your personal advocate to live, laugh, love, learn. Her life motto, don't die wondering. Take back your life with Dr. Marissa Pay.
And welcome your 222. Take my advice. I'm not using it. Get balanced with Dr. Marissa. The morning show here on NBC News, the NBC News and NBC Sports radio station, KCAA, AM 1050, FM 106.5, home to the Asian Oprah, and streaming everywhere. iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, TuneIn, Audible, Amazon Music, TV Live, Rumble, Podchaser, Spreaker, and more. Happy Monday, everyone. This is your hashtag positively opinionated host producer of a show that they said wouldn't last beyond a year because there's no gossip, no scandal, and no K words, no Kanye talk at all. Instead, I want you to focus on your own reality show and how you can be happy 88% of the time. So I have topics and guests to that end. I hope you had a really great weekend honoring your veterans. And because it landed on a day that I was not live, I decided to sandwich the honor with having also a repeat guest come on. He came on last Monday, and he was such a hit with my cashew gallery that they asked if he would return. And I can never say no to my cashew gallery, to invite him to continue to come and honor his father, who was a very decorated and very special World War II veteran. Please welcome back to my studio my very special guest, Dr. Walt, Larimore. Good morning.
Good morning. It's great to be back with you. Gosh, last week went so fast, I couldn't believe it. So I'm honored and privileged. I know you don't ask many people back, so thanks.
You're right. You're absolutely right. You're up there with Don Wells, who was Marianne from Gilligan's Island, and Happy Days cast, and Keiko Matsui. So I'm glad that you feel honored, and your father's story was just so unbelievable and believable and wonderful that I thought, you know what, we got to continue this before we forget what we were talking about. But before we get started, let's go real quick into my morning blissipline, which is taking a bite of my gratitude sandwich. And we just want to say hello to the Cashew Gallery. We have Orville Nation tuning in from Portugal, and Maria is here from Colorado. Where's Troy? This is unusual. I usually see him first thing in the morning. So, but maybe he is busy, but he is one of the people who really wanted to have you back. Thank you, Orville. Great, nice compliment there. But let's go right ahead to gratitude. So what are you grateful for? And the top of the bun is 8 specific things. We'll make it short because we want to get to the story. So give me 3 things that you are grateful for in one word each, and I will do the same, and we'll let the Cashew Gallery also participate in that. And then we go to the bottom of the bun, which is, what do we like about ourselves? What do we appreciate about ourselves? Because a lot of us are walking around with like a little antenna going, who likes me? And instead of approving of yourself, you're constantly looking for outward validation, and that's a horrible way to live because, frankly, people are fickle and they like you one minute and they don't like you the next, and all of that. So I want you, for Mental Health Monday Matters, especially today, to anchor yourself in who you really are. Know it that you're one of a kind, wonderful. All right. So there's the preamble for Breakfast with Dr. Marissa and her guest, Dr. Larimore. Here we go. What are you grateful for?
So start with me?
Yep.
Oh, well, I love that description of the fruit of the Spirit, and the top 3 are love, joy, and peace. Who could not be grateful for those?
That's perfect. And I am grateful for the sun, the stars, and the ocean. How's that? That was pretty quick. And let's see, what do you like about yourself? I'll start this one. I appreciate that I am a trooper. I've had a broken blood capillary on this eye. I woke up this morning with some kind of a bite that swelled this eye shut. So I'm like, okay, we're still going on. Thank God there's makeup, and we're just going to keep on rolling. Go ahead.
Well, for me, Barb and I will celebrate our 50th wedding anniversary Friday. And I am as I look back on those 50 years, I'm grateful to my Lord. I'm grateful to God, and I'm grateful to Barb. Both of them love me just the way I am, just as I am. But both of them love me enough not to leave me there. And so that relationship with the two of them has changed the course of my life. And how could you not be grateful for those gifts?
That's beautiful. I think that appreciating how loving, lovable, and loved we all are would be a great way to wrap up this bite of the gratitude sandwich. So thank you so much for having breakfast with me and all of you in the Cashew Gallery. I promise that if you repeat this discipline for 28 consecutive days, you will sandwich your day in the most positive way. And so try it. It's delicious. The deliciousness of life. All right, here we go. Let me just give you, for those of you who were not here for last week, I'm going to just give you a little bit background. Let's see. Dr. Walt Larimore, my guest today, is an internationally recognized family physician and educator, an award-winning medical journalist, and a best-selling prolific author who's written, co-written, or edited 41 books, 30 medical textbook chapters, and over 1,200 articles in a wide variety of medical journals and lay magazines. His most recent book, which took nearly 16 years to research and write, is about his dad, Philip B. Larimore's exploits and heroism in World War II. At First Light, a true World War II story of a hero, his bravery, and an amazing horse, has been named an International Page Turner Finalist this year and has also received a silver medal in 2022 from the Military Writers Association of America. As a result of Dr. Larimore's research and writing, his father has been recently inducted into the 3rd Infantry Division's Hall of Fame, has been nominated for the Army's Officer Candidate School Hall of Fame by none other than General David Petraeus, and the book has been featured at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, the LSU Military Museum, and at the Louisiana Book Festival. And that deserves another appreciation right there, because that is truly, truly amazing what you've been able to accomplish. Yes, and we're getting some great reactions in the chat now. If you are driving, please do not chat. But if you're not driving, please do go to my YouTube TV channel, free subscribe, and you'll get an alert every weekday morning that I'm about to come on live and splatter you with more hope and happiness. And just delighted that you're here. I'm a little distracted. I have my grand dog son with me today, who is a Frenchie, and he's not supposed to be, he has some skin, he's allergic to everything. And I just told his mom that he's not been itching at all, and he's making a liar out of me. So excuse me for being a little distracted. I'll go get him in a second. But why don't you give, for those who are just tuning in, like a little sound bite on At First Light, sort of the highlights, because they are so amazing. I would try to, you know what? Let me see if I can do it, because I want to see. I actually was trying to explain this. I love a challenge. All right, so, and this is part of what I wanted to follow up on is your dad was in World War II in Europe, and he came back from the war with part of his leg gone. He was an officer in the Army. And every time you asked him, how did you lose your leg? Or what happened to your leg? He would say, oh, I accidentally shot myself, or something to that effect. And it was an accident, and blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't until his 50th wedding anniversary, which you're coming up on, that your youngest brother, how's my memory so far? Your youngest brother said, Dad, how did you really lose your leg? And then the dam broke open and he began to relay these incredible stories about his life in the war. And y'all were like, okay, we went from 0 to 150, and I don't even know if we believe this, but he was consistent. He was a professor at Louisiana State University. Is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Wow, I even got that right. So I'm impressing myself. He would relay these now open stories of what he was doing, and then he, unfortunately but peacefully, died suddenly. And you found in the attic of his house, you and your wife, Barb, found a footlocker who, I should be the narrator in the movie. Anyway,
You're perfect.
Found the footlocker with 16 journals or some incredulous number with a very close account of every single thing that happened to him, chronicling newspaper clippings, scrapbook, journals, accounts, first accounts, medals, you name it, all of the things that he had collected and yet kept so close for so long. I'm guessing 30 years or 30 some years if I do the math.
Right.
And then that's why it took you 16 years to validate and verify and really, make sure that he really, this was his story. And that's how At First Light was written. It's a beautiful book. Troy actually already got it. He has it on his mantle with my book. And Dr. Walt Larimore has now brought this story to light. And that's how my boss, Fred Lundgren, who owns the station, forwarded me your publicist's write-up about the book and said, this looks like a great guest. And that's how I found you, by the way. So how did I do?
I mean, 1,000%. And by the way, I didn't tell you last week, Dr. Marissa, but please tell Fred, thank you for introducing us. I am so grateful to that. I said, this woman is wrong. She's wrong. She calls herself the Asian Oprah, and she's not. She's Oprah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was such a nice compliment. I made him write it out. But honestly, I didn't call myself the Asian Oprah.
Uh-huh.
It was actually given to me as a name when I won the 2012 or 14 Asian Entrepreneur of the Year award, and they brought me on stage. And I honestly was so uncomfortable with that because I thought this were too big to fill that I left it alone. And then my big brother, Michael Bernard Beckwith, who's the founder of Agape International Spiritual Center, having 37-year anniversary ourselves on Sunday, but he introduced me to Oprah, his friend, as Asian Oprah. And at that point, I had to accept and be honored by that moniker, and I take your compliment definitely to heart, and I think she has single-handedly brought the real discussion about what it is to be alive, and soul and spirit and love and peace to the forefront, when TV in her day, back in the day, was all Jerry Springer crazy, the worst common denominator. So for that, I am grateful to follow in those footsteps. And if we have time, remind me to tell you, because people will say nicely, you really don't need to use that moniker because because you are Dr. Marissa, you don't need to say Asian
Right.
Oprah.
Right.
So I'll finish. The reason why I still use it is, one, it's an honor. Two, when I go on the carpet and I'm interviewing Halle Berry or John Travolta, if I say, hi, I'm Dr. Marissa, can I ask you a question? It's completely different than if I say, hi, I'm Dr. Marissa, also known as the Asian Oprah. And then automatically they're laughing. It's a completely different interview. So that explains why I still use that.
Oh, you are who you are.
Thank you. And I do appreciate the intent of and the spirit of the compliment. But okay, enough about me. Let's go to, let me ask you one of the background questions before we get into a couple more stories, because the stories are fascinating. Why do you think that your dad didn't want to talk about his leg, talk about the war until 30 some years later? That's a lot to unpack, and it's quite late. So give me, from your perspective, you were son number 1 out of 4?
Yes.
Yeah, the oldest. So what would you say now, looking back, was the reticence that he had to speak about that?
Yeah, great question. And he's not at all unusual. Almost all of the World War II veterans that I've interviewed and that other people have interviewed had the same exact reticence. And they would give several reasons. Number one, they would not want to be considered heroes, because to a person, they believe the heroes are the ones who are buried on the battlefield, the battlefields of Europe, the battlefields across the Pacific. They adamantly and unanimously said, those are the heroes. Those are the ones who should be remembered. They gave all of their tomorrows for our todays. They would say they put all of who they were on the altar of war to preserve freedom and liberty for our children, our grandchildren, and their children. So that was one important reason. The second was that although almost all of them either went because they were enlisted or if they volunteered, which a great number did, it was for adventure and excitement and to be John Wayne and to become a hero and have excitement and to travel. Remember, they were just coming out of the Depression. And so to be able to eat food and have uniforms and to be able to travel places they had never been, all of that was kind of motivating. But when they got there, especially those that were on the front line, like Dad was, I mean, first night on the front line, working from dusk until at first light in the no man's land, bringing ammunition to the front and cutting wire and placing wire and defusing mines and putting wines. And then, hey, Frenchie, and then if there was a skirmish, they had to fight. And they saw so much death and so much disaster and so much horrible things. Dad talked about the odors, the smells, the fragrances that were tattooed into his nose, the nightmares that he had for years, not towards the end of his life, but early on. And so they wanted to leave that behind. They didn't want to do things that would remind them of that. So they came back. Almost all of them got married. Almost all of them were married for life. The divorce rate among veterans was extremely low. They were they had been loyal to their country, but they were loyal to their spouses and loyal to their children. And most of them worked in one job. They found something that would fill their passion, give them joy, give them gratitude, and they did it for life. And so I think those were just some of the really important reasons. But at the end, as they began to consider, well, what did I accomplish? What did I do? Did I do any good? To be able to meet with others with whom they had fought, who survived, and then to be able to tell their stories to people who had forgotten what they had done, who had forgotten their suffering and their sacrifice and their successes, became for many of them an important thing to do. And at least in the case of my dad, I'm so grateful that he did.
Yeah, very, very much so. Thank you for that. And totally, I think one of the reasons why I cried in the first interview is for me to grow up as a peace activist and to, I'm all about peace. There is that tendency, it's an unintentional thing, to look down on war, to sort of not appreciate what benefits, or you mentioned 3 S's of war. What was it? The last one was the success of war.
Oh, the suffering, the sacrifice. Yeah, the suffering and sacrifice. And Dr. Marissa, they didn't do that for their own glory. They did not see themselves as conquerors. They saw themselves as liberators. Both they wanted to go in the case of Dad, to go into Northern Africa, to Sicily, to Italy, to France, to Germany, and then to Austria, to liberate people who were under evil. They were under oppression. They were under slavery, and their goal was to free them and then to leave and to get back home, but also to preserve the liberty, the freedom that we had in this country. They had just recovered, as I said, from the Depression, and they were looking forward to picking this country up by its straps and getting back on with life. But the war came in between that.
Yeah. And I think it's an important frame for all of us. I know that I've been challenged to relook at my BS, my belief systems around war, and that distinction between, we know everything, and our BS belief systems, forcing other countries to do that. But the whole liberation from Hitler, from what he was doing, not just, to the people, and the whole Aryan race idea, but also, as you said in your story, what he was doing with the horses. And that was truly. So let's get to some more stories. The youngest to become an officer still stands, right? As sort of like a Guinness World Book of Records in the. Tell me about that. Did he mean to do that? Was it very competitive?
He had been a juvenile delinquent. His mom was a legal assistant who worked 12 to 14 hours a day, often 7 days a week. His dad was a conductor, a Pullman conductor on the Illinois Central Railroad that ran between Chicago and New Orleans. So those trains were called the City of New Orleans and the Panama Limited. And some of our folks who are my vintage will remember Woody Guthrie singing that song, The City of New Orleans. But his dad was a Pullman conductor. And so they would be gone. And Dad was a latchkey child. He didn't do well in school. He didn't like school and got in trouble. So at 13, his mother and his father banished him to a Gulf Coast Military Academy. He went to a military school as a 13-year-old freshman. And there he flourished. He did activities that he loved. He learned to fly, to sail, to dive, to run, to play competitive sports. He learned military history and technique and theory. He thrived there. He became a leader. He graduated with honors just after Pearl Harbor. And because of that, and because of his experience, he was then put into officer candidate school as a 17-year-old teenager. Now, our military people that are listening will understand and know that OCS, Officer Candidate School, you don't get in until you're a college graduate. Well, here he was, just barely a high school. So he became the youngest ever graduate of the Army's OCS. I think one of the reasons that General Petraeus has nominated him for the OCS Hall of Fame. But immediately after that, he couldn't get into the Army because he had to wait a couple of weeks for his 18th birthday. And he was commissioned on his 18th birthday, got his Eagle Scout Award as a Boy Scout 2 weeks later after that, but then became the youngest commissioned officer in World War II, the youngest commissioned frontline officer in Europe in World War II, and one of the most highly decorated. He fought nonstop for 15 months. It was 412 days, was wounded or in the hospital 6 times, but turned down 3 of the 6 Purple Hearts he was nominated for because he didn't feel the wounds were bad enough to qualify for that. But he was given he earned every award that the Army gives accept the Medal of Honor. And he also earned the French Medal of Honor. It's called the Croix de Guerre, before losing his leg, not his life, thank the Lord, but his leg 30 days before the end of the war. And almost all of that time, he was on the front line. He became the youngest company commander when he was 19 years old in the Army. And it's just this amazing, epic story of Army stuff. But as we talked about last time, there's also these wonderful, amazing horse stories that happen. And then a huge battle when he fought for after the war, he fought for amputee officers to be able to stay in the Army.
Wow. Wow. If you've just tuned in and you're wondering what's going on, and if he looks a little familiar, he is. I had him on last week, and I'm just delighted to have him back. It is Dr. Walt Larimore, who is sandwiching the honor of Veterans Day with more stories, true stories of his father, who is described and is a hero on so many counts in his new book called At First Light. And this is Take My Advice, I'm Not Using It, Get Balance with Dr. Marissa, the morning show here on KCAA, the station that leaves no listener behind, NBC News Radio, home to the Asian Opera. So delighted that you're here. If you'd like to watch and listen, please do go to my YouTube TV channel, free subscribe there, and you will get a link that will give you an alert every weekday morning to tune in. And welcome to my fabulous cashew gallery, who is always providing lots of great comments and questions. I think there was a question here for you. Dr. Larimore, have any opinions on Dr. Caldwell Esselin and Dr. Dean Ornish's work by any chance? I don't know who they are. I'm not sure if you know who they are, but Orville has a very broad base of knowledge. Did you want to comment on that? Do you know who he's talking to?
Yeah, it's a different topic, off topic completely. But as a family physician and as a medical journalist for about 5 years, I did a television show initially on America's Health Network called Ask the Family Doctor. I was the medical director for that network. And then that was purchased by Fox, and it became Fox Health for about 3 years. And I was the medical director there at Fox and for Fox Health. I had the opportunity to actually have Dr. Dean Ornish on my show several times. And he was revolutionary as a cardiologist, as a California cardiologist, in realizing that lifestyle and diet could have a significant effect, not only preventing heart disease, but also in helping people recover from heart disease, to prevent second heart attacks, for example. And I think that his data, although incredibly revolutionary when he first published it in mainstream peer-reviewed medical journals, but it's held up through the decades. In fact, every January I make it a habit of looking at U.S. News and World Report's. They evaluate all of the diet plans that are out there. They redo it every year. They gather together a cadre of experts to look at them and their value, how easy or hard they are to do, what do they cost, do they work, do they not work. And the Ornish plan still rates in several categories in the top 3 nutrition plans. And so, long story to a short question, but I am glad to be his acquaintance. I was delighted to interview him, and I'm a real supporter of his evidence-based, trustworthy way of recommending health.
Well, I got to have you back again just to talk about that topic of, the diets and all of that, because, anyways, I don't want to talk about that now, though. So let's go back. Was there more than one horse story? Because you talked about the Lipizans, which was fascinating. And I just want to give you a chance. Is there other horse stories that we should know about?
Oh, there's dozens in there, Dr. Marissa, in that story, because he was an equestrian. He started riding horses as a little boy and was great, not only riding them, but jumping them, hunting with them. Fox hunting was a thing that was big in those days. They hunted foxes. They never killed a fox. That was never their plan. It was just to be able to ride out in the country. But the original title of the book was War Horses, for the men that fought, being war horses, but of all the war horses. So there's a chapters about draft horses. When Dad was in his training, he became exposed to and learned to train and drive these massive war horse draft horses that were very popular and used in farms across the Midwest. Every base he was on, he learned to fox hunt as a formal fox hunter and became a fox hunting master, if you would. When he arrived in Europe, before being deployed to Anzio, he was in Naples, and there was a world-class dressage master. Dressage is a competitive form of horse riding where the horse and the rider become literally one. And he was able to learn dressage in Naples the few days that he was there. When he arrived in Anzio, he worked in the front line, as I said. They worked at night, and phosphorus flares would go up and light up the whole battlefield. And so he and his men were very exposed. So he came up with the idea of using mules, both to carry supplies to the front line, and those mules could very quickly learn. They're a very smart animal, much smarter than horses, Dad said. And as soon as a phosphorus flare took off, those mules would lay down to protect the men and to protect what they were carrying. They also had an uncanny sense. They knew where the mines were, and they would never stumble and they would never step on them. The next horse story in the book was after the fifth D-Day. Everyone knows the northern guys had one D-Day. The southern guys had 5 D-Days. They had Africa, Sicily, Salerno, Italy, Anzio, Italy, and southern France. After their southern France D-Day, it was so overwhelming. It was so effective. It was the first D-Day in U.S. history that was done during daylight hours. That's how confident and how good they were. And they were chasing the German 19th Army. They had them on their heels, retreating as fast as they could. And the German 19th Army got caught in a little gap in middle of France where they were trapped. And they were slaughtered. I mean, literally slaughtered. What many people don't know, I didn't know, is that German artillery and German armor was in general horse-drawn. So there were tens of thousands of horses that the German army used. In fact, at one time, Dr. Marissa, up to 7,000 German horses were dying a month in the war. Well, after the attack was over, there were hundreds and hundreds of horses that had died, but also that were wounded or just scared silly. And so Dad was assigned to go in with some other farm boys to decide which of those animals should live, and to calm them down and to round them up, but also which of them needed to be put down and how to put them down humanely. So that's a very powerful story. Once they got into the Vosges Mountains, a mountain range in northeastern France, where the German army was dug in, and no army in history had ever conquered an army that was dug into those mountains, and never, ever in winter. The U.S. Army did it. But Dad used the mules again to be able to get supplies up those slippery, icy winter conditions. And then the final main story is when he was sent in on a secret mission to discover where the Lipizzan stallions, those famous white dancing horses from Vienna, Austria, had Hitler sequestered them into one place where they were likely going to all be killed. And if so, could they get them out? And so Dad was the guy that was chosen to go in and determine, yes, the horses were there, they could be saved, and that allowed General Patton to authorize what was called Operation Cowboy, sending in a cavalry unit into Czechoslovakia to save the Lipizzan breeds. Then the end of the book, after he loses his leg, he comes back and he rehabilitates, but he, along with the physical therapist, developed what was called hippotherapy, as equine therapy. It was using horses to help recovering veterans recover more quickly. And then after that, as he fought to allow amputee officers to stay in the Army, he went to Washington, D.C., to Fort Myer, where he became part of the caisson platoon. Those are the soldiers that ride the horses that pull the caskets into Arlington Cemetery, National Cemetery. And he was an executive officer of that platoon, had to learn a whole different way of riding. And then the culmination of the book is when General Patton brings back the horse that Dad rode in Czechoslovakia to find the Lipizzans, brings it back as a gift to him. And that becomes the book. Dad saved that horse's life, but that horse also saved his life. And that's the end of the book. I won't give that away. But
Yeah,
lots of horse stories.
that is beautiful. There's just so many places I want to go. The POWs that you mentioned that they found that were also at the place where Hitler was sequestering the Lipizans. They were released or rescued at the same time?
Correct. And they all survived. It was predominantly American and British POWs, as I understand, but also others from other countries. And they were treated fairly well in this camp because it was an ancient horse farm. It is a royal horse facility. So it was a very, very nice facility. They were fed well because they kept the horses. They were the horse trainers, the horse brushers, the horse feeders. So because they were taking care of a number of royal breeds, Andalusians and Frisians and Berbers and thoroughbreds and quarter horses, and the Lipizans, of course. And these horses were very valuable to Hitler. He was trying to decide initially which one would be the perfect horse for this evil Aryan race that he had eyes of. And he finally chose the Lipizans, but they still had those other breeds there, and they were rescued also.
Right. Now, as you were writing this, as you were finding and reading the accounts of what your dad had done, I can't even imagine how emotional some of that was. And like how many times, if I could put words in your mouth, it's like, Dad, like, I wish you would have told me this before you left so that I could have learned more, celebrated more. What was that process like for you? Just to,
Well, I traveled to a couple dozen military institutions in 8 states in this country, including the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, the World War I Memorial in Kansas City, the records, National Personnel Records in St. Louis, the Glider Museum in Waco, the Infantry Museum and Library in Fort Benning, Georgia, now Fort Moore, as well as the 3rd Infantry Division, on and on and on. And then, of course, museums and archives in Italy, France, and England. But the moment that just gobsmacked me above all others, and there were many, but I went to the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, near Washington, D.C., and the archivists there are amazing. And I wanted everything they had on the 30th Infantry Regiment and the 3rd Infantry Division. They pulled almost 80 boxes of archives. And I spent almost 10 days just going through page after page after page, many of which are used in the book. I knew the weather each day. I knew the morale of the men each day. I knew how many were killed or how many were captured. I knew the successes they had and the failures that they had. I knew their passwords and their codes. But Dad had, as I mentioned earlier, the Army had a policy that if you were an amputee officer, at the end of rehabilitation, you were kicked out. You were no longer considered an officer and a gentleman. You were no longer considered fully human. And he thought that policy was, he said it was inane, insane, and inhumane. And he devoted his post-war career to fighting that policy, recruiting congressmen and senators and generals. General Eisenhower became a close friend of his. They played bridge together there in Washington, D.C. President Truman, Dad was part of the military district of Washington. So he was at the White House often, bringing his men there in dress uniform for state events. And so he became very close with President Truman, who all supported him in this fight. And it ended up, Dr. Marissa, with one final hearing. It was extremely intense. The closest thing I could compare it to would be if any of our viewers and listeners watched the movie A Few Good Men, where the final court scene had Jack Nicholson and Tom Cruise. Dad described an incident like that, where the colonels that were interviewing him felt that he was disabled, he was handicapped, he was of no use, he would be harmful in the Army. And the language that they used was very demeaning and very demoralizing and it turned out very depressing. But I had to wonder, well, is that just, is his memory working right? Was just hurt feelings or what? And I really didn't know until the day I was standing in the archives, opened up an archive box, began flipping through page after page, and then I opened up the transcript of that hearing, word for word. Everything that he said was there, plus more. And I just sat down and wept. I had a good friend when I was writing the book. I said, Jerry Jenkins has written over 200 books, kind of a mentor of mine. I said, Jerry, I think I'm going to make this a novel because I'm having to invent some language, that may not have happened. And Jerry said, Walt, it can't be a novel. He said, novels have to be believable. Nonfiction books have to be unbelievable. And your dad's stories are exactly that. They're unbelievable, but you've documented. This court scene was unbelievable, but you've documented. And I just sat there and I just wept because I realized what it was he went through. The only other time I wept in the process was after I finished the book. I knew it was going to be published. I went to visit his grave. He has a mom's graves at Port Hudson National Cemetery, just north of Baton Rouge. And I sat there with mom and dad, and I said something like this. I said, Dad, I've always loved being your son. I've always loved you and mom. But now I'm honored by it. I'm honored by you, and I'm honored by what those young men, those teenagers did for Europe and for our country.
I was going to try to make you cry this time. Not you. You already made me cry 3 times last time. Oh my God.
No, I do. I get upset and I mean, in a good sense. Grateful tears. I tell you, I had something happen. Had something happen.
Good. Yay! Tears are the disinfectant that keep our hearts soft. And I also know that when 2 people cry together, that connection is the strongest connection.
Without doubt. I would have sent you a picture if I'd have thought about it, but I just got an email from a friend who read the book. He's a fan of it, but he told me about a friend of his who's in the Army, had read the book, and he flew to the LSU Army football game, which was 2 weeks ago in Baton Rouge. He wanted to go watch Army play. But while he was there, he rented a car and he went to Port Hudson National Cemetery, and he wanted to see Dad's grave. And he took a picture of himself at Dad and Mom's grave site. And then he sent it to his friend who sent it to me. And I was just so touched by that we can look back at history and we can see the good, and we can not only appreciate it, but then decide, well, what, and this is what you harp on, Dr. Marissa, is what can we each do that's good and loving and grateful so that we don't take things for granted, but we take them with gratitude. And not only the health that we get from that, not only the health that my father got from that, despite his discouragement, despite his depression, he decided to become a better person, not a bitter person. He decided that all of these terrible things would soften his heart, not harden his heart. And he decided with the counsel of a chaplain to not ask God, why did this happen, but to ask his God, what are you teaching me? What do I need to learn? Where do I need to change direction so that my life would have love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control? And so he developed this moniker. I love it. He said, you may be disabled and it may not be your fault, but the worst thing is to be disabled with a bad attitude. And so he developed the idea that you're not disabled, you're differently abled. And he devoted his life to being the best husband, the best father he could, the best scoutmaster, the best professor. He became a beloved professor at LSU, well published, more than me, for over 40 years. He had hundreds of young men that he discipled and coached through scouting, a number of whom named their firstborn sons after him. And Dr. Marissa, I'd have to look a long time to think of a more successful life. And yet, like most of the men with whom he fought, it remained a secret. How many stories we don't have that I wish we had?
Yes, yes, beautiful. Yeah, are you in touch with anyone who he fought with?
Yeah, yeah. I actually interviewed 3 of the men with whom he fought. Their stories are included at the Army Heritage Education Center in the War College, Army War College up in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I found memoirs, unpublished memoirs of almost 24 men with whom he fought, was able to contact their families, use those memoirs and reconstructing scenes and battles and even conversations, and then was able to, with those soldiers that with whom he fought, or their immediate family, like their spouse, their wife, or their children, to bounce off of them conversations that I was reconstructing. I would say, "Does this sound like your dad or your husband? Would they have phrased it different or said something different?" I remember contacting Dad's best friend. His was Ross Calvert. He's a major character in the book, but his son, Ross Calvert III, and I have become very, very close. And some of the language that I invented for Ross Calvert, his son said, "Oh, no, that's not accurate." And I said, "Well, Ross, it's in these letters." And he said,
Right.
"Well, I guess it is." His daddy called my daddy Daddy-O, and that was in some of my letters. And then, wouldn't you know it, after the book was published, Ross found 15 or 20 of his father's letters to his mother and dad. And there it is, Daddy-O. In fact, Ross Calvert didn't know his dad rode horses. Ross and my dad were part of that cavalry unit that saved the horses in France that had been wounded. Ross never knew his dad rode a horse. I never saw my dad ride a horse.
Yeah.
And then in one of those letters that Ross Calvert wrote his mother, he talks about that rescue day, and he called it Calvert's Cavalry. So those family interactions were and still are precious.
That is very precious. And I want to just mention Dr. Omega earlier, who's in the Cashew Gallery. Thanks for coming in. He said that his great uncle, I believe, was General Patton's chauffeur or driver. Small world, right?
Well,
I just love that.
Yeah, I was just at Baton Rouge for the opening of Dad's exhibit at the LSU Military Museum, and General Patton's grandson and great granddaughter were there, and it was nice to touch base. Dad's fiancee during the war was Marilyn Fountain. Her daddy, Colonel Fountain, was General Patton's chief of staff, and that's how I found out about General Patton bringing back that horse for Dad after the war. The horse that would have been killed, it was a 7/8 thoroughbred, Dr. Marissa, and because it wasn't a pureblood, it wasn't perfect, it was doomed for the glue factory. It was doomed to be killed. And because of what Dad did and a Nazi vet did, that horse was saved.
That's amazing. I do want to express some outrage while I remember that there was that throwaway policy for anyone who lost a limb during the war. They were decommissioned in effect, right? They lost their I can't. But as I practice, I have to practice what I teach instead of getting mad for longer than 16 seconds because I don't want to attract more stuff to be mad about. The question is, I can't wait to see what good comes out of this. And your dad, I'm gonna, I gave you Dr. Marissa's Beneficial Presence on the Planet Award, but your father's life was just fraught with improving and making better all those things that were temporarily in the dark. And for that, I want to give him Dr. Marissa's Beneficial Presence on the Planet.
Well, and I will tell you something that I've told very few others. So this is a secret just for you and me and our listeners. But part of the hidden meaning at first light is that his life became a light. What could have been darkness and devastation and destruction and depression, he turned that into a light that was never too bright, in the sense of never making people feel uncomfortable or shining a light on them. But it was always a winsome, I describe it as a lighthouse, a warm, welcoming lamp in a living room on a winter evening. And so he chose to become that light. The policy then was to discharge Army officers, and Army enlisted men could stay in, but it was just officers. The good thing that happened that he was grateful for was just a few years later, the Army changed that policy, and that change persists until today. Not just Army amputees, but an Army or a military person who has any degree of wound, I mean, even the most severe wounds, if there's a job available for them, then there's a program that allows these wounded warriors to not only stay and serve the country and the service that they love, but to do a job that's meaningful and to be able to teach it, because they can teach things that no one else can teach. And so I think Dad's, from where he's sitting now, is smiling, thinking, I didn't make an immediate change, but we did make change for good.
Yes, you absolutely did. We're almost out of time. I do want to just include some of these very relevant comments. Dr. Omega was watching World War II oil tankers make it through a blockade. My mom was shocked, realized her father was captain of the ship.
Wow.
And, this is all, it's so, if nothing else, I mean, there's so much good that has come out of having you on the show. But just like you will treat veterans that you see having a meal at a restaurant, I hope that this whole series and my spotlight on the show changes for you as it has changed for me forever. The way that I see the service that has been done for our country in war, and that, there's that whole attitude and BS and belief systems about the wrong in war. I'm not advocating war, but to not know and not forget. I was part of my bonus dad was honored, and I don't have time to play it. Go to my social. Was honored at his new facility that he's staying at. He was a Korean War vet, and he got to lead the Pledge of Allegiance. He doesn't want to talk about the stories either, because they're so painful and they're so horrible. But that we can honor those who did. And as you're saying, the depression that you mentioned about your father, he chose, he had every reason to take that anger and sadness and be bitter. Like that is, and we see it, in the homeless. And what can we do to really, listen and honor and support those? They didn't have a choice. Yeah. It's not like they wanted to, go and be part of the warmongering industry. So anyway.
And Dr. Marissa, just 10-second final thing. If I hadn't had Dad's 450 letters, I wouldn't have a book. And so text, email, they're fine. But today, write someone a note that you love. They'll treasure that written note forever.
Yes. Go get the book, At First Light. Thank you, Troy, for already getting it. Want to so support this whole effort to illuminate instead of hide and be embarrassed by, but be proud of what our veterans have done. And thank you so much for coming back on the show. You're going to have the record for making me cry on my own show, but tears are the disinfectant that keep my heart soft. Thank you so much again, Dr. Walt Larimore, for coming on. Thank you for your story. Go get the book At First Light. Thank you all for joining us today. It is all about balance. Peace in, peace out, world peace through, inner peace. Now go and have the best day ever. We'll see you tomorrow.